Ah, hot corners. You good to go, Adrian?
Yes.
All right, I'll go ahead and get started. First, I want to say thanks to BSides for letting me get up here and speak. The badge says talent. I don't know if that's really accurate, but I'm going to go ahead and try to do my best anyway. My name is Jamie Murdock. This talk is the importance of threat intel into your information security program. So a little bit about me. I'm the CISO at a company called BDS that is soon to be announced, so I can't really go into more. I have 15 years experience, primarily on the blue team side. I focused on security operations centers, incident response, threat intel, and all that kind of fun blue team stuff. In my previous gig, I worked for Dell SecureWorks, and my focus was building security operations centers, primarily for Fortune 500s, as well as building threat intelligence programs for them as well. On my spare time, if you will, I assist in profiling of foreign cyber criminals for some folks in some three-letter agencies. All right, so what is threat intelligence? Why is it, important? If you can read the screen, it says threat intel is considered situational awareness enabling integrated operational actions to protect, prevent, mitigate, respond to, and recover from cyber incidents. This is the actual definition that Congress gives threat intelligence. Basically, to make it, real, threat intelligence is just gaining information to help you increase your information security program and help reduce the response time if you actually do have an incident. So there's two primary types of threat intelligence. You have open source intelligence, and then you have more of your commercial subscriptions. Your commercial subscriptions is something that you usually have to pay for, and open source intelligence is just as it says. It's open source. It's something that you can actually do on your own. So open source intelligence, what is that? It's basically just intel that's gained from available sources, whether it's Google, social media, IRC, a lot of other different sources. It's a great source of chatter. It's a great source of near real-time, if not real-time, intelligence on a lot of different things that's going on, whether it's active operations, whether it's planned operations. A new 0-day comes out. Look on Twitter. Somebody's getting hacked. You'll find it on a lot of different sites that show, hey, this site has just recently been hacked, and here's how. The good thing about open source intelligence is you can actually start developing your own profiling of bad actors. So this can be an individual hacker, this can be an organization, this can be a new attack vector that's targeting your specific industry, or maybe even your company. The good thing about it is it's something you can do. If you don't have a threat intel program already, it's something you can start on your own relatively easy. The next type of intelligence you have is commercial feeds. Commercial feeds are typically subscription-based, and what you get from them is intelligence that comes from their sources. Now, their sources might be other people who subscribe to their service and give feedback. It may be something that's automated, where if you're a member of a certain type of threat intelligence subscription, you agree to have your information passed to them for them to analyze. Or it could be something where they're monitoring network traffic, and they're seeing what's going on in the wild, and they're taking advantage of their internal resources, something you may not have, to actually look at what's going on in the world. They look at actual cyber threats. They can tear them apart. They have their own threat analysts working on them, and they actually have people who can reverse engineer malware, look at what that malware is, see where it's coming from, and then provide their subscribers that information. Now, the thing about commercial intelligence is it usually is based on IPs or certain domains. That's good because you can feed this information into your SIM. So it'll help you increase your monitoring perspective. The thing is, they also use open source intelligence as well. So they'll take this open source intelligence and they'll actually apply some logic to it. They can provide a timeline of bad actor A. What have they done in the past? How have they elevated their attack methods? What are they going to do in the future based on the path that they've already gone down? So your commercial feeds will actually take open source intelligence and put a lot of good information into it that you can use. Another good source of intelligence is the news. Issues in the real world directly affect the cyber world as it is today. It's important that your organization, no matter how big or how small, pays attention to what's going on in the world. Take a look at the situations in Syria and the Ukraine. You can actually plot out, if you pay attention and you start doing it on your own, you can actually plot out where the Syrian Electronic Army increases their attacks or their focus based on what the United States government says. So the President of the United States says, we want to start backing Syrian rebels for reason X. Well, you're going to see the Syrian Electronic Army start ramping up their operations based on that in almost real time. You start monitoring Syrian Electronic Army in Twitter, for example, and you monitor the State Department or the White House, and you see an announcement that has something to do with Syria, almost immediately, if not shortly thereafter, you're going to see SEA saying, oh yeah, you want to start supporting the rebels, we're going to start attacking you, and we're going to go after these people. The situation in the Ukraine, same thing. Shortly after the Russian incursion into Crimea, you saw an almost instantaneous escalation in cyber attacks from Ukrainian supporters in the Ukraine against Russian supporters, and companies that do business in Russia. So these things that happen in the news, these things that you see in the news that are happening in the real world, start to almost immediately mirror what happens in the cyber world. So I'm not going to go into a lot of examples. This is a half-hour talk, but I'm going to hit on 3 things in here that kind of, bring this whole thing together. The first one we're going to talk about is the SEA, the Syrian Electronic Army. Now, what they mainly focus on is misinformation. They'll take over Twitter accounts, they'll hack news sites, and they'll put out something to the effect of, there was an explosion at the White House. Barack Obama has been seriously injured. Now, it's a lie, it's misinformation, but what does that do? That starts to put a concern out to people who may see it and think it's real, that something has happened in the United States. There's been a terrorist attack in the United States. And what is that going to do? It's going to affect the economy. It's going to affect people's reactions to what's going on. You could start having a run on the banks. You could start having, people maybe not even showing up to work because they're scared that, this is the big one and, the shit's hitting the fan. Something as small as a Twitter takeover can have further reaching effects into the real world. Something else they do is they do attacks on U.S. defense systems, whether it's actual military sites. There's, the big boys like Northrop Grumman or Lockheed or any of these guys. Now they'll specifically target these kind of companies, but they will also go after their suppliers and even one step down the chain sometimes to their suppliers. So it doesn't, these things don't just affect the big boys. It also affects the companies that go from maybe a large company to a medium company to a smaller company, because if you can get a foothold in that smaller company, that smaller distribution chain, and you can get into them, then you can start pivoting your way up the chain to actually affect your true target. Russian and pro-Russian bad actors. Now, Russian hackers, this is nothing new. This has been going on forever. However, as I said before, once Russia invaded Crimea, you started seeing a big rise in attacks. And you started seeing a big rise in attacks from Russia to the United States. This is mostly because of retaliation against U.S. sanctions against Russia. So the United States imposes sanctions on Russia for invading Crimea. What do Russian and pro-Russian hackers do? They start targeting financial institutions in retaliation. They start trying to cause economic damage to the United States because they're feeling the economic pressure. This just doesn't affect financial institutions. You may not be in a financial institution. Your company may not deal with financial institutions. So you think, hey, I'm cool. It doesn't matter because we're not in that space. Well, what if your executives have dealings or holdings with these financial institutions? Or even employees that have dealings or holdings with these financial institutions. If I'm a bad guy and my end goal is to cause economic damage to the United States, why not go after this person, this executive in your company? Because he has holdings with this bank that I'm going after. So I'm going to target your company to get after him so I can use him to get into this financial institution and cause harm. Something similar, it's not really pertinent to what's going on in the world right now, but if you haven't heard, it was just announced that the NASDAQ was hacked 4 years ago by Russians. And their whole goal in that was to cause economic harm to the United States. Now, luckily, the code that they put in didn't work. So, allegedly, we don't have anything to worry about. But that's just another example of, what happens when real-world situations marry over into the cyber world. State-sponsored attacks. Everyone has heard a million times about China trying to hack the United States. Iran has really upped their game and is actually the top state-sponsored organization that is the biggest threat right now in the threat landscape. But they're not they're not people who just go out and look for something really quick or the low-hanging fruit. They have predefined targets. They have specific goals to accomplish. And the thing is, it's not necessarily that they're better than, American hackers, for example. They just don't care if they get caught. I mean, it's been proven that state-sponsored Chinese hackers targeted American corporations. What's happened with that? Not a whole hell of a lot. I mean, what's that? Yeah, put out arrest warrants. I've done work for some agencies for some hackers in Eastern Europe. You know what's happened with it? Nothing. Because are these foreign companies, are these foreign governments going to turn over these guys even though they have a dossier on exactly what they've done and who they are? No. Nothing's really going to happen with it. They don't care. So why does all this matter? What makes it important for you or your company and the information security program? We have traditional defense in depth. We have our IDS, we have our firewalls, we have content filtering, we have all this different stuff. So why do you need to incorporate threat intel? Now, all this stuff that we have right now, or we should have, is important, but it focuses on technology. Your company, your executives, your employees can be targeted to compromise a larger target. The World Cup's a good example. There were 2 simultaneous operations based on the World Cup that went after the sponsors of the World Cup, as well as Brazilian government and commercial sites as well. Now, in the example I gave before of maybe it's your executive that has dealings with another company. That was happening pretty often where Brazilian nationals that had dealings, whether they sat on a board, they had accounts, etc., in American corporations, were targeted. So the people who were perpetrating these attacks would actually go after the companies trying to get access to these individuals to cause harm for the Brazilian government or for the sponsors. So it's pretty common that, hey, I might just work at a 5-man shop, but if your 5-man shop has any dealings, or the employees or executives or board members have dealings with somebody that's on a target list, you're going to get targeted as well. I'm trying to speed through this just to save time, so bear with me. The main part of threat intel is the human element. As you saw in Dave's keynote, if you were here this morning, social engineering still works. Social engineering will always work. And although your threat subscriptions mainly focus on technology, it'll still give you another layer in detecting attacks. It gives you another method to look at what's going on in the wild. What matters to you and your company and your industry? Gather this information, start creating your own threat profile, your own threat intelligence program based on what's going on out there. By utilizing open source intel, you can focus specifically on your company, your vertical, your organization, your partners. Anything that you really want to focus on and incorporate into your information security program, you can get it by very basic open source intelligence methods. Another thing is brief your leadership team on what's going on out there. It's very easy to send an email in the morning saying, here's what's happened today. Here's what's in the news from the threat landscape. Here's how it may or may not impact us. But your leadership in your company will start seeing this. I mean, how many times have any of you had your manager or somebody come in and say, hey, what's going on with this target breach thing I see? What does that mean? They want to know. They're starting to become educated in what's going on, and they want to know more about what's happening. The more you arm your executive leadership team or even management or anyone else, the more focus they're going to have on information security and why it matters. So the biggest question I get whenever I talk to anybody about threat intel is, well, where do I start? What do I do? How do I actually get something like this going in my organization? The first thing I tell anybody is monitor open source intel feeds. And honestly, the best thing is Twitter. Twitter is almost real-time information on what's going on. Talked to a couple of buddies of mine this morning that I used to work with at an organization. And they didn't know it, and there was another organization in the same vertical that was huge, and they didn't know it. They were getting DDoSed. Now, it was just a script kiddie running low orbit ion cannon, wasn't really being effective, but they were being hit. And one of my buddies who is in the SOC, who monitors Twitter, saw somebody said, organization X Tango down. I said, Tango down? We're not down. So they started looking into what's going on in their SIM. They started looking at their traffic. They started looking to see what's going on. And sure enough, they were under a DDoS attack. So they saw somebody else that was involved. They notified super big company. And they said, oh, we're being DDoSed? We have a DDoS attack going on? We didn't know. And these companies also have social media monitoring, which is usually a sales or marketing function. And they didn't pick up on it either. So just by monitoring Twitter, and if you do nothing but monitor Twitter, you're going to start getting a good threat intel package going. Provide daily threat landscape briefs to whoever will listen. I guarantee you, if you come in the morning, have your cup of coffee, by the time you're done with your cup of coffee and you start looking at what's going on in Twitter, what's going on in different, trade rags or anything like that, you'll have enough information to put an email together with these links, with this information, and send it out to whoever it is that's on the distribution list. So what does that do? It gains awareness on what the threat landscape is, where we're going, what's going on out there. And it gets more value to your information security program. Start taking this information that you can get from open source intel or even subscription feeds and incorporate that into your SIM. Start tracking this information. Start writing content in your SIM or your monitoring program to say, hey, we know that these sites are bad actors, that these IPs are malicious. So we need to really focus on that. Start profiling bad actors or groups or attack methods that are used, and take all this information and wrap it into your vulnerability management program. If you see that there's an attacker and his favorite thing to do is go after exploit X, and you have systems vulnerable to exploit X, in your monitoring program, start watching that. Start writing content that says these systems have this vulnerability, this bad actor targets that. So if we see activity from this bad actor, especially on any of these vulnerable systems, we really need to have, the alarms going off immediately for that. So in conclusion, there's a lot of different threat intel sources out there. There's a lot of different information you can use and you can get and take advantage of. Real-world attacks, real-world situations play out in cyber world on a daily basis. You need to really start watching for collateral damage. You may not be a target, a direct target, and maybe you are, of some of these attacks, but you could be collateral damage because of what's going on in the real world. There's a lot of different sources you can look into. There's a lot of different threat intel feeds that are free. There's a lot of different open source intelligence methods you can start using on your own. The main thing is just to start looking. It doesn't take anything to start monitoring some groups in Twitter. It doesn't take anything to start seeing what's going on in the threat landscape. Just take that information and apply it to your monitoring program, your incident response, your vulnerability management, and start getting some real-time information, because threat intel will actually take your it'll start taking your monitoring program to the next step, so you're more proactive than reactive in your monitoring. And by doing this, it'll also help decrease the time it takes during an incident. Questions? You, sir. So the question is, if you take, for example, bad IPs, and you incorporate that into your SIM, do you have a time to live based on this information? It depends on, the answer is yes. Now, how long you keep it in your SIM or in your monitoring program depends on what SIM you're using, how long you actually want to keep it. What I always recommend is just kind of continue to monitor that. So, is this IP still bad? Is it still malicious? Is it command and control? If it's command and control, has that command and control system been brought down? Does that answer your question? Kind of. I can talk more later if you want. Yes, sir.
Kind of like stuff we're asking you, give me like a tweet or a threat group that you look at, just to kick us off.
Sure. So the question is, for Twitter accounts to follow, just kind of a kickoff to start looking at. Syrian Electronic Army, SEA. I can't remember if that's their official or not. It might be SEA_official. There's a million different flavors of anonymous. Honestly, keywords. If you have TweetDeck, for example, and you can create lists, keywords like your company's name is big, or your company name and hack, your company name and Tango Down, your company name and whatever else you want to put in there. Look at different flavors of anonymous feeds. Keywords that are going out for different types of threats, like #op and then anything else, because that's going to be a great one to start with. From there, you can start building, branching it off. Any other questions? All right, I'll hang out for a little bit over here because I know I had to go through this pretty quick. So if anyone else has any questions, I'll be at the corner of the bar. Thank you. Thanks.